Previously on Route 29 Stalker.
And then I was looking at the license plates, and I noticed that the license plates were 30-day tags. So I knew that it was nothing that I could write down or anything like that. But I did get the feeling that something wasn't right with this person doing this.
And then a few minutes later, I saw them going really slow in front of my house in the northbound lane. And they did a loop and came back around, and then they pulled into my driveway. He sat in my driveway for like a minute, and then I guess he couldn't, get the courage to knock on my door, and he pulled out. So I'm just wondering, what if he did knock on my door? What was he going to do?
Well, that's on the same road. On this same road was where the mechanic that when you first turn on the road, there's a mechanic that lives right there, but he had that same type of truck for sale for the longest time.
Sure, you'll get into a huge rabbit hole just like I did. A very unusual deaths in Culpeper. All unsolved.
2 decades, 10,189 leads, and Virginia State Police say they are still looking for the man who tried to stop 20 or more women on the highway.
In that region over the past 2 decades was found murdered in
It's been over 20 years since St. Cloud native Julie Williams and Lolly Winans of Unity, Maine were found murdered in the Virginia
horrific crime, a particularly grisly crime.
They called the killer the Route 29 Stalker.
From O3 Films at Watts Creative Studios, this is the Route 29 Stalker, and I'm your host, Woody Graham Watts. As we continue to cover the cases along Route 29 that started in 1996, I want to remind everyone that's listening, all of these cases are still unsolved. These families still have no closure. That's why what we are doing is so important, to keep these cases alive and to generate new leads and information. These names are with me every day. And now, we've touched on even more victims from this time period. And since 1996, Alicia Showalter Reynolds has been linked as the first victim of the Route 29 Stalker. And we just covered Julie and Lolly's murders in the last few episodes. 2 more victims from this time period, close to the same area of the Stalker's territory. And up until this point, the Route 29 Stalker still hasn't been caught. We've talked about Alicia's case and started to touch on what many believe could be other victims of the Route 29 Stalker with Julie and Lolly. I'm going to warn you, at this point, we have to bounce back and forth. However, I promise you, you'll see where they all become connected. Now keep in mind that as soon as Alicia's disappearance was known, women began calling in and reporting the same description of a white male between the ages of 35 and 45, around 6 foot tall, clean shaven, with a clean casual appearance, attempting to pull them over. Most of the accounts mention this male driving a pickup. However, the size and color varied, so the police began to wonder if the suspect had access to more than one vehicle. There were thought to be 23 stops during 46 days by the stalker, with most women turning the stalker down for a ride. However, 3, including Alicia, actually got into his truck, and one of those was Carmelita, who we covered in an earlier episode, who survived. Over the next year, 15,000 leads came in, with no hard evidence or a publicly known suspect in sight. Then, in July of 1997, something happened that would seem to tie them all together.
July 1997. Yvonne Malbasha was passed by a white male driving a small pickup during her bike ride in the Shenandoah National Park. Yvonne then took a turn down a more remote road. The small pickup then passed by her, causing her to fall. Once she gathered herself and got up, this man stopped the pickup and jumped out screaming obscenities and then attempted to abduct her. Malbasha then fought back, throwing a water bottle at him, then holding onto her bike when he tried to force her into the small pickup. The man then attempted to run Yvonne over several times until she frantically found refuge behind a nearby tree. The man then sped off, attempting to leave the park. By the time rangers had caught this attacker, he had changed his clothes and reattached license plates that had been removed before the attack.
Keep in mind that he was arrested at the park a year after Alicia's, Julie, and Lolly's murders happened. And he actually pled guilty to the attempted kidnapping and received an 11-year sentence. An investigation was launched during that time on this suspect, with the investigators reviewing the camera footage taken at the park entrance during the same time period as Julie and Lolly's murders happened the year before. They noticed something. They noticed he had entered the park on May 25th, the day after the last known sighting of Julie and Lolly. Then, again on May 26th, through a different entrance. During this suspect's time in prison for the attempted kidnapping in 1997, and after an investigation, an announcement was made on April 10, 2002 by the Attorney General saying that a federal grand jury had charged this suspect, his name, Darrell D. Rice, for Julie and Lolly's murders because the two women were a couple. And this suspect, Darrell Rice, had made anti-gay statements in the past. And that led the killings to be labeled as hate crimes, leading them to seek the death penalty. However, the case crumbled without any direct DNA link to Rice. His lawyers also pointed out that male DNA from someone else was actually found at the scene, and the anti-gay statements were actually incorrectly transcribed to change the meanings. This meant that the murders of Julie and Lolly couldn't be pinned on Rice. However, he did make a plea deal on another case, an Alford plea. That's a plea that means a suspect denies guilt, but admits there's enough evidence to convict. He made a plea on an attempted kidnapping in 1996 on Route 29 of Carmelita, our survivor from a previous episode. Carmelita identified Rice as that man who directed her off the road, telling her that something was wrong with her car. She got into the truck with him, and he then attacked her, pushing a screwdriver into her neck, and after an intense struggle, Carmelita, with a broken ankle, was able to flee the truck and escape the attack.
Oh, there was so much that I couldn't include because, I started to go down the rabbit hole of, Darrell David Rice and how he attacked the woman in Shenandoah who was riding her bike. And I sort of got into that. But, there's a whole other thing with uncanny it is that they were all happening, in sort of the same time frame, and all of them have gone unsolved. And so there's just so much speculation. And, you know, I know that some people have made assumptions that Daryl David Rice could have been obviously there was the assumption, at least for a while, that he murdered Julianne and Lollies, and then, that he was involved in potentially some of those other unsolved crimes as well.
In an interview with Stan Gregg on March 4, 2003, U.S. Marshal Larry Carter claimed that Daryl D. Rice had admitted to rage against women, and there were times while on the highway he enjoyed running women off the road on Route 29. When Carter asked what he did after that, Daryl would say he would just keep going. When asked about Alicia Showalter Reynolds, Rice then told Carter he didn't know who that was. Then, in 2005, in a courtroom in Prince William County, Carmelia took the witness stand and swore that Rice was in fact the man who had abducted, attacked, and even robbed her. Rice's defense team claimed her identification was unreliable since it had been 6 years since the attack. Also puzzling was that according to Rice's employment records, he wasn't at work at all but one day during the period when 18 of the women were pulled over. His defense team, however, disputes this. Also, in 1996, his father was living in a rented house located in Culpeper, close to Route 29. Before being sentenced, Rice said, "I am not guilty of the crimes I was indicted for. This is all for strategic reasons. It is in my best interests to return to my family," referring to the fact that as part of his plea agreement, no time was added to the sentence he was already serving in federal prison. Investigators from the Park Service and FBI believe that Rice is guilty not only of the 1997 attack on Yvonne, but of the Alicias, Jewel, and Lollies as well.
Despite the ongoing search for answers, Tom does have a strong belief on who's behind the horrific crime. A man who's been out of prison now since 2011.
To this day, Daryl David Rice is the primary suspect. He had been indicted at the time.
There seemed to be a case breakthrough when authorities announced charges of capital murder against Daryl David Rice back in 2002. However, those charges were later dropped when hairs at the scene ended up matching a different person. Still, Tom believes Rice is likely the man who's responsible.
I do believe that had it not been a capital murder case, that he'd be convicted and put away now. That's how strongly I feel that he's a murderer.
But let me say this, no one has been exonerated in this case. And so our aperture is wide open. We are looking at anyone that had any relationship to the events on the Shenandoah 20 years ago that took the lives of these two ladies.
Before the charges were dropped, prosecutors said that Rice targeted Williams and Winans because of his hate of women and homosexuals. The FBI won't comment on specific suspects now, but the case is still being investigated as a hate crime.
There's certainly some indication that they were targeted sort of pursuant to a hatred of their lifestyle or their choices. And that is something that was certainly covered in that press conference, and I think that's certainly how we still scope the case.
So up until May of 1996, so far, we have Alicia Showalter Reynolds, Julianne Williams, and Lollie Winans, all women, murdered in this area within a few weeks of each other. Now fast forward to 1997, and a man named Daryl David Rice attempts to kidnap a young woman at the same park where Julianne and Lollie were found. This same suspect was also supposedly ID'd by Carmelita, one of the Route 29 stalker's failed attempts that survived. Now, let's talk about the location again of where Alicia's body was found. A place called Lignum that we talked about in episode 4. Lignum had something else happen that July. Another murder. The murder of Thelma Scroggins. And in that same year, in September, another young woman's burned remains were found, just 10 miles of the location of where Alicia's body was. And because of you, the listeners, we are getting phone calls and emails every day with new information. And well, this one has us making a trip to Lignum.
First of all, I'd like to say I like what you're doing. Huge fan of the Up and Vanish podcast. Got real into them. Now it's I was just told about this one yesterday. I got some pretty wild information. Not information, but he was telling me about this podcast and that there was a murder in Lignum. And turns out that I used to hunt that piece of property.
For more information about this podcast and what we've found regarding the Route 29 Stalker, visit Route29Stalker.com, Route29Stalker.com. As we investigate this, we will be releasing all the information we gather on this website. We also have discussion boards. Thanks for listening. Meet us back here for the next episode.